Cageside with John Morgan.
And welcome everybody to another episode of Cageside with John Morgan. I'm your host, Eric McMahon. No show last week as we were in observance of Memorial Day. I didn't get any rest. I got two kids running around, so it was crazy. Hey, let's go ahead and set the docket for today. UFC on ESPN 45. Really good card, free card. You can't complain with that. A lot of people are upset about that. We'll dive into that. Not only was that main event controversial, but that co-main event, huge war. We're going to go through that. Jim Miller, man, the timeless machine. We'll get into Jim Miller, and it is UFC pay-per-view fight week. We always love a pay-per-view, even if it's not the strongest card. We're going to dive into that. Last question before we leave: is the Conor Chandler fight going to happen? Our John Morgan caught up with Dana White. You will see it here. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce the man. You can follow him on Twitter, John_Morgan_MMA. John, what's up, pal?
It's good. It's good to be back, man. Obviously, like you said, took a week off. I mean, Memorial Day, obviously, a very important day for this country to observe. But I want to talk some MMA. You know what I'm saying? We put that behind. Now it's time to go. We're starting this stretch of events for the UFC that's just a nonstop for the next 4 months, man. We are loaded up and ready to go.
All right. Well, let's just get right into it then. UFC on ESPN 45. Amir Albazi remains undefeated within the octagon, improves his record to 17-1 overall in a very controversial split decision victory over Kai Kara France. It was a great fight. We're hearing the name robbery thrown out. We're hearing travesty. We're hearing all this. Let's start with you. How did you have the fight? Was it a robbery? Was it a travesty? What say John Morgan?
First, let me say that I do not think it was a robbery. There were some very, very close rounds along the way. But with that said, I will say I had this fight scored for Kai Kara France. I had Kai Kara France taking rounds 1, 4, and 5. I thought round 1 was very, very close. So, I mean, that could easily sway the other way. And I can tell you, sitting inside the Apex, you know, former UFC champ Rashad Evans sitting in front of me, you know, media around me to the side. I can tell you right now, we all had scores all over the place. And that, to me, is why I say not a robbery. If everybody around me that's sitting next to me, all these professional observers who spend every moment of their life consuming this sport, watching it alongside me, if they all have the same score and it goes the other way, then I start leaning towards robbery. But I'm telling you right now, going into that 5th round, we're all turning around, looking at each other, saying, what do you got? You know, I had it 2-2 at the time, and a couple others had it 2-2 at the time. But a lot of people are saying, no, it's 3-1 Albazi. It's 3-1 Albazi. And so for that reason alone, I just knowing that they were close rounds, knowing that professionals next to me had it that way going in, I say no robbery.
Here's what's not up for debate: 3 and 5. It's not up for debate. 5, Kara France clearly put the gas pedal down. Now, whether that's because he thought he was behind, whether he thought the fight was in the balance, who knows? Or he's just a damn exciting fighter too, so that's very plausible. 3 is when Albazi got him down, took his back, not for discussion. For me, I kind of right off the bat, I was like, Albazi's just completely controlling this fight through 3 rounds. And then this is what I want to get into, right? Because in my opinion, I love commentators. I love everything. They were leading us down a path that I don't like. I don't like them leading us down a path. They were basically saying, hey, Kara France is widening the gap here. And this was in the first 3 rounds they were saying this. So I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't see that. In specific of what they were talking about is significant strikes. So for me, I'm watching the fight and I'm watching Albazi stalk him essentially the whole time, dictating the pace, maybe not landing the bigger punches, but he was landing punches and he was dictating the pace on where the fight was going. That means a lot to me as a judge. And then DC, or I forgot who the commentators were already, but they're like, oh, the significant strikes are so ahead for Kai Kara France. The gap is just widening. Begs the question. What the hell is a significant strike?
This is the eternal question I think everybody asks over and over. What is a significant strike? And is there, a need to rehaul or to redefine or to do things different? Now, according to the official, stats people, a significant strike is all strikes at distance and power strikes in the clinch and on the ground. It does not include small short strikes in the clinch and on the ground. So it should not include the small pitter-patter type stuff. But a couple things, I mean, significant, that word significant, I mean, it is significant, right? It sounds like it means something to land. But technically, if I'm just at range and I'm landing a little jab that I'm just popping out, it's all strikes at distance. Now, am I really hurting you with that? Am I really doing damage with that? Which that is the criteria that we're supposed to be using. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, you know, those stats are being compiled live, right? Which is an incredibly hard thing to do, especially when you're talking about flyweights who are going at just nonstop speed throughout, right? I mean, things happen so fast. So what is the accuracy of those things? They're being tabulated by a human, right? It's not a computer that has sensors in the gloves that knows exactly what's happening. It's being tabulated by a human that's watching the same match. So it's incredibly difficult. And I think those stats can really, really mislead some people. And to your point, the commentary, and obviously, you know, I love doing some commentary, but you have to be aware that, man, the commentators aren't necessarily 100% accurate. And you're right about the fact that I think sometimes, you know, people allow the commentators to really dictate the truth of what's being said, when really it's just their observation. It's their point of view. They may be seeing things a little bit different. So it really does kind of, a lot of these things, man, they really just do add to the confusion of the discussion. It's frustrating to have these discussions over and over, isn't it?
You know, it really is. And here's where even your definition of what a significant strike, you say the little pitter-patter strikes in the clinch aren't a significant strike, where I don't see any way that they had that wide disparity if they're not counting that as a significant strike. And here's why I say that. Because now are they going to count that as a significant strike? Because let's say Albazi is in on it really deep, you know, he's really deep in on a double. Caceres is, you know, sprawling really hard against a cage, and he uses a couple of these little pitter-patters just to get one of the arms up to here, which now is eliminating the takedown. So by definition, I think that changed from a double leg to now I'm going to protect my face just a little bit, even though no damage was done, and changed from a double to maybe a high crotch to maybe a deep underhook, and it changed the position a little bit. Is that a significant strike?
Well, you know, it's a great point, because all I read to you was what the definition was supposed to be, right? But if I pull up UFC stats right now, the difference in significant strikes and total strikes for Caceres, 283 significant strikes throughout the matchup. Now, this is thrown, not landed. 323 thrown. So 99 significant strikes landed, 133 total strikes landed. So that's 34 strikes that weren't considered significant. For Amir Albazi, 43 significant strikes landed, 64 total strikes. So only 21 strikes landed throughout the time that were not considered significant. So there's not many non-significant or insignificant strikes happening throughout the course of the match.
So what I'm reading in that third round, when he's got his back and he's just doing this thing to try and open up a spot for the rear naked, they're counting that as a significant strike.
That would be the one place where there were 30 total strikes and only 9 significant in the third round. So I would say that probably not. But, you know, if I look through the rest of it, it's 13 of 20, 16 of 17. The third round was 9 of 30, 4, 27 of 29, and 5, 34 of 37. So the third round, the one spot where you're most concerned that those are being considered significant, that would be the one place that those were not considered significant.
Well, and it really doesn't matter because he had the back. He was winning the round anyway. So,
absolutely. I mean, absolutely.
It's kind of that point is a moot point because we're not talking about some significant strikes for Amir Albazi. We're talking about it for Caceres. I'm just confused on the statistician. And I think, you know, when you have, you know, Bisbing and you have whoever else is at the table and they're kind of like sitting there and they're reading these stats like, oh, significant strikes. I think even one of them, I forgot the female who was on the card, but she was like, I don't know. And she kind of brought it up a couple times. I don't know about that.
Yeah, that was Lorisenko that was on there. Michael Bisping was on there. You know, so look, it was close fight. I mean, close fight. As you said, 3 and 5 were the ones that were not up for debate, and I think that's a great way to put it. The other rounds were close. I mean, there were a lot of close rounds there. Well, I didn't think 4 was necessarily up for debate too, and I think that's why a lot of people got frustrated because there was one scorecard that had Amir Albazi as round 4, and I think that's the one part that the most controversial that people are saying, hey, how does that happen? And I tend to agree with that. I think that was just a bad card. But, you know, I thought round 1 was very, very close. And I mean,
I gave 4 and 5 to Caceres. 1, nothing really happened other than Albazi kind of stalked him a bit. 2 and 3 I gave to Albazi. So it was all up to round 1, in my opinion.
I agree. And I can tell, like, again, that I can tell you a lot of people had it that way as well, man. The people around me, again, professional journalists that watch this thing, that were sitting there cage side with me, that were not being influenced by commentary, because we can't hear the commentary. That were just being influenced by what we saw. A lot of us, had it 2-2. A lot of us had it 3-1. So that's why I say no robbery. I don't like the one card of the round 4. I think that was a mistake. Mistakes do happen. This is a very human thing. But not a robbery. But I did have it going the other way.
Well, one person who did have it as a robbery was said teammate of Kai Kara-France, the middleweight champion of the world, Israel Adesanya, and he starts firing off tweets. And I want to get to them because these are kind of fascinating, and we have gotten into the same debate, and his last tweet brings into question what we've been talking about, where you've even commented on other people's posts on Twitter. So let's get into it. Tweet number 1. Nah, bro, F yours. That was right when it was come out, right? Tweet number 2, fire Chris Lee and Sal D's nuts. Right? Because those were the 2 that gave it for Albazi.
Right.
Then a third tweet, he claims he did both of those, or maybe possibly before the results were announced. I tweeted that before even seeing the score. Oh, no, before seeing the scorecards. I'm sorry. Right. He already knew. So what he's saying is before he saw the scorecards, he already knew that Chris Lee and Sal D'Amato were the 2 that scored it in the other direction, which he disagreed with. So he goes, I tweeted that before even seeing the scorecards because I knew them 2 will F it up. How many times will they rob athletes of their moments of glory, their money, their livelihood for their family? F them C's. They need to expire. They need to expire quickly and go. Mike Bell was the only judge to score it properly. The other 2 refs need to disappear. Now, last tweet. This is what I want to get into. Start interviewing the judges after fights. Hold them accountable for their work. He's no short of feelings on that matter. Can't say I completely disagree with him. I know Sal D'Amato has taken some beatings over the years. I can't speak to I can't recall fights right off the head where he did good or bad. Apparently Izzy can.
Yes, he can. And for the record, yeah, Mike Bell scored the fight exactly the way I did. He gave rounds 1, 4, and 5 to Kai Kara-France. Sal D'Amato scored the fight exactly the way you did. He had 1, 2, and 3 for Amir Albazi and 4 and 5 for Kai Kara-France. It was that Chris Lee scorecard who had 1 and 5 for Kai Kara-France. He had 4 for Amir Albazi, which we all agree is a bit wild. Had he had that thing split, had he had that one round scored the other way, the fight goes the other way. Speaks to how close everything was, and that does seem to be the one kind of big red question mark on there. So I understand what's happening. Now, first of all, you're tweeting about a teammate, so obviously your motivation. Now, while I'm not saying I disagree with his position as far as the strong and emotions of it, and like this is the only correct way, you're going to understand he's going to be a little bit motivated by the fact that this is his teammate, so I understand that. But I don't disagree with the fact that I would like to hear a little bit more from the judges. I would like that. And I've had this discussion for many, many years because I think transparency is important. Now, I was tweeting a little bit about this last night in some discussions, and that I do understand why these judges and why these referees, when that happens, aren't necessarily put in front of the media, right? Like in business, right? What company would want an employee of some level speaking for the company as a whole, right? That's just not a good practice overall. You want people that are trained. You could be a great judge, a great referee, and also be a horrible public speaker. You can also get incredibly nervous in front of cameras. You can also get incredibly nervous in front of the media, at which point you might start tripping up, say some things that you don't mean to say, make some mistakes, and then you're put on record with that. I mean, there's all kinds of potential complications that can happen. So I understand the reluctance of putting somebody in front of the media, in front of a camera, but I would love to see either, whether it be a lead official on the night or somebody that's a trained representative that speaks for, whether it be the head of the commission or somebody else. I would love to hear that because, again, we all have these questions. Chris Lee, how did you have round 4, for Amir Albazi? And if that, if somebody could at least speak to it, I mean, I just think that would go a long way towards transparency and a long way towards all of us. I mean, you and I speak openly and you speak about your own experiences, but that's not really the norm. And it would be so nice to hear, hey, this is what I saw. This is what I thought I saw. This is what I based my decision on. Because I think a lot of people think that these officials don't care and that they just, whatever. I just wrote down a score and I move on. As you know, being a trained official yourself, They do care, like way more than anybody realizes. And so I think a little bit more transparency would be beneficial. How exactly that transparency take place, I think, is up for debate, and I understand the reluctance, but I would like to see more of it.
Yeah, I just don't see it how it's even possible. Truth be told, because you made an analogy on Twitter, and this is where I agree with you wholeheartedly. Is like, hey, an employee screws up in a Fortune 500 company. It's not like you're going to go put that employee in a press conference, right? There's bosses, there's CEOs, there's executives. That's up to the athletic commission to maybe address internally. But and then that almost brings up another whole set of questions of whether there's, some sort of good old boy networks within these commissions and whatnot. Now, I don't think Vegas is that way, but I've seen a lot that are that way. Right. I don't think Vegas is. So I don't think that is here. They are the forefront. They are innovators in Vegas. But, I mean, it is just as well as I do. There's so much good old boy nepotism in athletic commissions in different states that, like, hey, so-and-so is the friend of so-and-so. Oh, have they ever trained? No, they're good. Judge this fight.
Yeah. As you said, I think it's important to point out that's not the case here in Las Vegas. The Nevada Commission, Jeff Mullen, an excellent commission head, the trained officials that are in there. I know the type of, commitment they have to the craft, so to speak. I mean, the education that they have. But I think some more transparency would be nice. Listen, I've lawn championed. I think it's, maybe difficult, but look at the way the big sports treat it with officials. You know what I mean? There is, kind of a debriefing. There is a post-mortem type save, a follow-up. Maybe it's speaking to a pool reporter. Maybe, it's one person. So I think there is a way to do it. And I would love to see, these judges, man, these referees, the judges, all of them kind of ranked a little bit based on performance. Now, I know with judging it may be a little bit more difficult because it is subjective in some ways. But, I mean, if most of us agree that, the expected outcome should either be the ones that Sal D'Amato or Mike Bell had, and then you have this one card that's a little bit off, can we notate that? And so that way, when we do go to these meetings, if you've ever listened in on a commission meeting or be at a commission meeting, especially when you talk about like UFC title fights, look here in Nevada, Jeff Mullen will step up to the commission and say, hey, I recommend, these referees be considered. Here's what I think should work. And it's named out that way. But I'd love to see, well, why are those people getting decided? Is it just because those are the guys you trust the most? Or is it because, well, in our analysis, if you look at the standings right now of who's performing at the highest level, it's these people right now. And that can ebb and flow. People can have hot streaks. They can have cold streaks. They can be doing well. I mean, I wish there was some way to kind of quantitatively measure who's doing good and who's doing bad. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity here for, the craft as a whole to move forward. But I just really do want to point out to anybody that thinks there's corruption involved, there's not, or that these guys and girls that are on these commissions don't care about what they're doing, because they absolutely do.
I want to tell a story about Mullins really quick. So he kind of not nurtured me in my fight game, reffing and judging career, but I can tell you, so he was the athletic commissioner for the state of Tennessee here. Ironically, my wife and his daughter are friends, right? I don't know if I ever told you that.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah. So, anyways, I would ref, and then, on these amateur scenes, I'll ref a fight, judge a fight, ref a fight, judge a fight. And he would come after fight sometime. And I don't know whether he saw something in me as a good potential ref and or judge, but he would come to me after a fight, whether it be a judging or reffing, and he would say, why? And he would put me on the spot immediately. And Jeff Mullins, I've said this before in Vegas, he's kind of above approach, because I think he is doing some of those things that you're talking about, because he would do it to me in the moment.
Right. Yeah, no, he is. Listen, his reputation preceded him before he came here to Las Vegas, and I've obviously had a chance to observe, what they do up close, especially, in the Apex. I mean, it's a small place, so it's not like they can go hide somewhere in a locker room underneath the arena or whatever. Like, I see the officials getting together after every fight, after every card, doing exactly that, evaluating. Why did you have that? I mean, the judges themselves do it. You can see they immediately get together and give each other their scores, and they're debriefing and they're talking about. So these things are happening. I just wish they were happening maybe in a more formal manner, in a more manner that we could see, whether it's like, hey, you and I have both observed it. You've actually been a part of it. We know it's happening, but how does the general public, how do they know that it's happening, other than just like, oh, take our word for it, we saw it. You know what I mean? So I would love to see maybe a more formal way of it going down. It is happening. I just wish it was happening in a measurable way, in a formal way.
All right, to what something that isn't any controversy was the co-main event. Alex Caceres wins an absolute war against a wily veteran in Daniel Pineda. And the story of the fight was some brutal body shots in this fight. Now, both guys got 50 grand, fight of the night. I was here for it. I loved it.
Fantastic fight. Absolutely fantastic fight. I mean, it was one of those ones that when Dana White came back to the post-fight presser and was reading out the bonuses, it was like no-brainer fight of the night. And we were all, yep, don't even have to say it. Yep, Caceres Pineda, amazing. And it's amazing. And this was a fight that kind of reinstilled to me sometimes, I think, what people forget about this sport, which is, we focus so much only on the superstars, only on who's at the top, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of people capable of delivering fantastic fights. I mean, Alex Caceres' career record 21-13, Daniel Pineda 28-15, respectable, not bad records, but not where you go, wow, that's amazing. You look at boxing.
Neither one of these guys has padded their record on the regional scene. They grew up in this.
I'm telling you, they came up at the highest level. You're right. And they've been facing nothing but elite level competition. And man, Pineda had so many opportunities to quit. I tweeted on that night, he's just made of something different, man. That dude would just absolutely not go away. And you start wondering about Caceres, like what's going through his mind where he's like, dude, I'm unloading the tank on this guy and he just won't go away. Why can I not get him out of here? Just a phenomenal fight, man. It just goes to show you, listen, we focus on the top contenders. We focus on the superstars, man, but there can be a great fight at any position on the card, man. That's what these veterans of the sport are about. And this was a fantastic fight. Probably won't show up on the fight of the year list at the end of the year, but it's one of those ones that was an absolute highlight of the night.
Interesting facts. Bruce Leroy, a.k.a. Alex Caceres, 11 UFC victories, ties him for 4th all time in the division. Crazy.
It's been around, he's one of those guys that is, he's still so youthful looking, you know what I mean? He still looks like a kid. He reminds me of a kid, but he's grown up right in front of us. I mean, we've literally, as you said, man, at the highest level of sport, both these guys. But Bruce Leroy, came in as such a youngster, and now he's kind of one of the veterans of the roster, which is wild. And really such an interesting cat to talk to, and just a great fighting style and a great personality, and just always fun. He is a guy that when he's on the card, you want to tune in and watch that fight.
Yeah, he's definitely a character for sure. Now, somebody who is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, Jim Miller, only needs 23 seconds to KO late replacement Jesse Butler. KO, that was great. Listen, it was vicious. It's a shame that I don't want to talk about the KO right now. Even though a timeless Jim Miller, I need to fast forward to or rewind about the late second replacement. Jared Gordon was originally supposed to be in that spot Wednesday. Would they pull it late Wednesday night? Jared Gordon was replaced by Jesse Butler because Jared Gordon revealed on media day that he had concussion 6 weeks earlier, which one of us could have told you, right, to a degree because of the headbutt with Bobby Green. But he reveals it in a press conference, which, if you're wanting to fight, you don't do that. You don't. Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's probably safe that he did at the end of the day, but here's where I really want to get to, right? Dana White has taken a lot of crap via the internet, like he always does, right? For like, hey, you should have known this. Why'd you even book him? And then you pull him. That's not your job to pull, or, you shouldn't have put him in this position, this, that, or the other. Listen, I could probably say this with a degree of certainty that when Jared Gordon said it, Dana White was like, you leave me no choice. The commission is going to come in if I don't preemptively do it. And I'm not saying the commission didn't go to him first and say, pull him.
Yeah, it's a weird situation, right? Because I see this from all angles, right? Like, first of all, I was in the room when Jared Gordon said that, and, it did strike me as, oh, maybe he shouldn't have said that at the time. But, I mean, I appreciate the honesty, right? I mean, it's respectful for what he's saying. And it was based on me asking him, like, hey, there's some concern that maybe you turned around a little bit too fast. Do you think maybe, you did? And he was like, no, I had some slight concussion-like symptoms, but I got through all those and I'm good to go. And that did strike me as a little bit like, oh, I don't know. But it is weird because the UFC did book the fight. I mean, they did see what happened, that he went out against Bobby Green. Now, granted, it turned out it was to a clash of heads, but he did go out. And so that's the basis line for what's going to give you the concussion. It did happen inside the UFC Apex. So for all the praise that I have for the Nevada Athletic Commission, it did happen on their watch as well. So, you know, they approved the fight for it to happen. They had to approve it for it to be on the card. So, you know, but again, there are those medicals that have to be submitted along the way. And did he reveal to anybody before that media day that he dealt with concussion-like symptoms afterwards? I highly doubt that. Well, so,
and you know it just as well as I do, right? What is the protocol for when somebody gets out of a fight and whether they get a suspension or they don't get a suspension? And I can tell you, I've seen this happen 1,000 times. They get out of the cage, they'll walk straight to the doctor. The doctor was like, you got nothing but 2 weeks. Then it's 2 weeks. So it's really out of the commission's hands because it's almost a third-party doctor where nobody is connected, you know, so there's so that nepotism isn't there. It's another doctor. You have the promotion, a doctor, the commission, you know, and so one doesn't dictate everything. Okay.
I agree.
So the doctor, whatever suspension that he put him on, he was clearly over that suspension, which I think takes any liability off of the UFC. It takes any liability off of the commission, right? Probably puts it onto the doctor. But then when he says it, like you're painting Dana White into a corner.
Oh, 100%. The decision they made was, I have no problem. Once it is said, you know what I mean? Once it's said, I have no problem with the decision to pull. I mean, I feel bad for Jared Gordon because, you know, Jared is a good dude, man. He stands for some great things. You know, he's always trying to help people battling addiction, people battling depression. I mean, he's trying to use his platform to reach out and assist people. So he's a good dude at heart. He's been through a rough stretch. You know what I mean? He had this loss to Paddy Pimblett that a lot of people scored in his favor, and it really upset him, you know, that he was handed a loss. Then he had this fight with Bobby Green that he felt like he was winning, and then the clash of heads, and he gets a no contest. So, I mean, he talked about coming into the week, you know, him battling his own demons. And so now this is just, I'm sure, going to add to that. You know, he said he was kind of in a dark spot, and then he got this matchup. So, man, I feel awful for Jared Gordon, but I also understand the decision from the UFC because once he says I was dealing with these, you know, concussion-like symptoms 6 weeks ago, they've got to be careful, man. I mean, as you know, the UFC is committed to the highest level of fighter safety. And is that to protect themselves legally? Yeah, absolutely it is. But I believe it is really, you know, their true belief and at the core of what they believe as a principle of how you continue to grow the sport. Combat sports at its base is not necessarily safe. But what you can do is everything in your power to make it as safe as possible. So I understand the decision. I wonder, you know, anytime we have these situations, you just wonder, hey, was there something that we could have done along the way to prevent it to getting to this part? And that's where I say, you know, was it maybe on the UFC to make sure that he was okay before they booked him? Now, if he doesn't say that, hey, I was dealing with these things, if he told them, yeah, I'm good, man, I did my suspension, I'm good to go, then they think the best. You know, could it have been up to the commission a little bit to say, hey, man, we just saw you 6 weeks ago. I remember seeing that. Are you sure you're okay? Are you sure you're 100%? But again, if Jared Gordon just says, yeah, man, trust me, man, after that, I was good to go. And let's be honest, most fighters are just going to be like, yeah, I was good. I was fine. Yeah, no problem. Went home, was back to training. You know, obviously I followed the suspension the way I was told, but I got right back to work. So, you know, the safeguards are in place. Maybe they just weren't, you know, exercised the proper way. So it's an unfortunate situation. But I do think you're right. A lot of people that are kind of trying to put this on the UFC, they really had no choice in this matter. I think they did exactly what they were supposed to do and what they needed to do.
So the seriousness of concussions in this sport, a lot of people will be like, well, they get a concussion every time, right? Probably. And that's why there's not fast turnaround. I'm going to point to one thing that is the worst situation you could put a promotion, a referee, judges, and or fighters, commentators into this singular position. Now, ironically, you were not at this fight because you were covering a show in Abu Dhabi. CM Punk and Eric Anders were on the CFFC card. I was the ref in the ring. It was the worst experience as a referee I've ever had. And a fighter, literally, his heart stopped. They had to revive him. Thank goodness they brought him back, but it was horrific. 2 minutes, no pulse, no heartbeat, right? Come to find out, and it was Pat Sabatini versus Jordan Titoni. I'll never forget Pat Sabatini. Now, yes, that Pat Sabatini in the UFC, he was the fighter who won the fight. Come to find out, medicals weren't completely honest.
Yep.
And there was a concussion in training camp.
Yeah, it's man, I was watching that one on Fight Pass because again, I was kind of bummed that I wasn't there, and then to see that all unfold, man, it was scary. It was absolutely one of the most scary. And I've watched a lot of fights, man, and it was one of the most scary situations ever. And as you said, You find out after the fact that there was a concussion suffered in training that was not disclosed on the medicals. And I'm telling you, those medicals, a lot of people just view it as a mere formality or a mere just like, whatever, it's a piece of paperwork. No, there's a reason they're in place, because it's not just the one concussion. As you know, what we're learning in all of sports, not just combat sports, is it's not necessarily that initial concussion that is the real problem. It's the repeated concussions and the repeated blows. And if you do not allow your brain the proper opportunity to heal, it can be an issue. And so you're absolutely right, man. I mean, I had forgotten that you were the referee in there that night, man. So you had an upfront, view of that, of an incredibly scary situation. And, it's still on UFC Fight Pass. You can go watch the whole thing unfold, and it is absolutely
and
scary.
I stopped the fight when they were still on their feet.
Yes. Oh, man, I'm reliving it now, and it's kind of just giving me chills thinking about it. So fortunate, man, because that could have been an incredibly tragic situation. But I think was 100% amplified by the fact that, a fighter stepped into the cage when he absolutely shouldn't have. And if he'd been following medical advice, absolutely wouldn't have.
That's why I will give Dana White no shit for pulling a fighter who said they had a concussion 6 weeks ago. End of story.
Mm-hmm. It is. Like I said, that's the thing about this is I feel awful for Jared Gordon, right? I mean, I feel terrible for him because I know the run that he's on, and I know, man, you get it. Like, to get to fight week and to lose a fight on fight week, man, I mean, not only is it financially difficult, not only is it physically difficult, it's mentally taxing, and he was already mentally taxed. So I feel awful for Jared Gordon in this situation, but it could have been a lot worse, right? I mean, maybe it turns out he gets in there and, he thought he was okay and he's not, and he felt he was okay, but he wasn't, and something tragic along those lines happens. Then we're having an entirely different type of discussion. So incredibly unfortunate situation, but to me, the right decision was made.
All right, good. Back to the fight, Jim Miller and the 23-second KO of Jesse Butler. But guess what? Jim Miller saying, I don't know what's going on, but I want to be on UFC 300. That's the only thing I know. Don't ask me about before. Don't ask me after. Ask me about when I'm going to be on UFC 300. To recap, UFC 100, UFC 200. If this guy is on UFC 300, which, if you follow the trajectory of an average of a pay-per-view a month, it puts us in, I think, winter of 2024. Or
no, it's earlier. It's like spring, summer, not even in the winter. So, I mean, we're talking about, a year away or less.
Dude, that would be unfreaking believable.
It's wild because he's been talking about it for a while, right? Like, Jim Miller's been around forever. Most fights in UFC history, most wins in UFC history. I mean, the guy is in the record books. I think he's a Hall of Famer, regardless of what he achieves. I mean, just that kind of longevity deserves recognition. But it's funny because earlier this year, he's been talking about this idea of 100, 200, 300 for a while, right? But it always felt so far off. And earlier this year, we were at a media day, and I'm like, Jim, this UFC 300 thing, it was always kind of this off in the distance dream, maybe this would be a reality. I'm like, have you done the math and realized that we're talking about like a little more than a year away, which it's, at one point it's this far off thing. Now it's kind of right around the corner. And he was like, kind of got a little emotional thinking about it. He's like, wow, yeah, right, man. It's just right around the corner, man. Like, it's not this crazy dream. Like, it can happen. I mean, this dude's performing at a high level. So I think it absolutely is going to happen. And I actually tweeted on the night of the fight, I'm not convinced that's going to be his retirement. His idea was like, let me make it to 300 and then I'm done at that point. This dude seems like he's fighting better than ever right now. He's 39 years old, but I mean, it seems like he's, physically better than he's ever been. I'm not convinced UFC 300 will be it. Maybe it will be, but I don't know. We'll see, man. But I just love seeing Jim Miller get in there, man. A true veteran of the game. And I love seeing the quote unquote old dudes, the guys that have been around for a while. I just love seeing them having continued success.
Love it. All right. Pay-per-view fight week, Vancouver, Canada. Unfortunately, you will not be there, but who will be? Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana for the women's championship. Could Mexico get another UFC champion? It seems like they're the new Dagestan.
They are, right? Mexico is doing phenomenal right now, man. Obviously Cain Velasquez, it was the leader of it all, but he was born in the United States to Mexican immigrant parents. So there was always that kind of asterisk. But now it's like, no, these are Mexican-born, Mexican-raised champions. You look at, Brandon Moreno and Yair Rodriguez. And I mean, it's just unbelievable the run that everybody's on. Irene Aldana, I believe, has the style that I would want to take into the cage against Amanda Nunes, right? She's physically imposing. She's got great boxing. I mean, slick boxing, some of the best boxing in all of mixed martial arts. But it's Amanda Nunes. It's the GOAT, right? You know what I mean? It's hard. That's it. And it's hard because I don't see how you pick against Amanda Nunes. I just don't. I mean, the Juliana Pena, obviously we saw her lose not that long ago, but then we also saw what Amanda Nunes did, in the rematch. We saw, I mean, Amanda said, look, I had a bad night that night. It was just terrible. And she made up for it. And so could she have another bad night? Maybe. I mean, where is her head at? She's kind of started to talk about retirement. She's building her family. It's clear she loves that. But, she also said, look, that loss re-energized me to come out here and prove it. So it's a tough one because it's a dominant champion. You look at the runs of like John Jones, Demetrius Johnson, Anderson Silva in his prime, George St. Pierre. They were these champions that went on these dominant runs. And it's like, how do you pick against them? Like, they're so dominant. How do you pick against them? And that's where I feel Amanda Nunes is. That said, if I was going to build a contender to contest in there, it would be somebody like Irene Aldana. So I'm intrigued by this fight. I lean towards Amanda Nunes. I don't know how you can't, but I mean, look, Alexa Grasso, her teammate, did the unthinkable. She became a Mexican champion by beating Valentina Shevchenko, who's in the same spot. How do you pick against Valentina Shevchenko? Yeah. You don't. So here we go. I mean, here we go. That's what's laid out there.
All right, I'm pulling up the line.
Oh, it's gotta be massive. Amanda Nunes has got to be the overwhelming favorite. I mean, all respect to Irene Aldana, but I'm going to say minus 250, minus 275, higher, minus 300, higher, minus 325, higher, 350, 375, 400,
390.
Oh my God. Wow. See,
but I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, the flux of where these women's divisions are and the influx. I mean, what I'm excited about in these women's divisions, you have such an influx of young, just hungry women's fighters that maybe aren't ready there. So, with an Aldana, she's only coming off two fight win streak. And it's just a shame that we're not getting, Juliana Pena in this to get the trilogy. But I mean, then if you look at the young gunners in this women, I mean, you're talking about like, what can Macy Barber do in the future? And I know different weight classes and whatnot, but it's all getting jumbled together in some weird way, and then you got Miranda Maverick, you have, she just fought a couple weeks ago. There's another young killer coming up. I forgot off the top of my head.
There's a bunch of them out there.
Miranda, like a Miranda Maverick who's fighting on this card. She's only lost to Macy Barber and the girl that her name is, I'm forgetting, and it's pissing me off that I'm forgetting. But the youth in this women's division is coming up, which that might need a little stagnation at the top right now. But I mean, I think the future is bright here.
Oh, I agree. The women's game is getting significantly better. I mean, it's just you've seen the leaps and bounds of the development, since Ronda Rousey helped bring the sport to the UFC. Because, look, for the longest time, there wasn't a reason for women to be training full-time because they could never make a full-time living at it. Now they can. Now they can be superstars. And it's a cool thing about mixed martial arts because I think it's one of the few sports where the women and the men are really on the same plane in terms of it's the same sport and they're recognized in the same way. And the talent level is really coming out there. So you're absolutely right about this. And
Erin Blanchfield, that was the name.
Erin Blanchfield is incredible as well. She's absolutely got a bright future ahead of her. Listen, the women's game is getting better, but Amanda Nunes, greatest of all time. I mean, the only argument is Chris Cyborg, who, of course, has been dominating for a long time, but they had the head-to-head and one of the most exciting matchups you'll ever see. I mean, that they absolutely went at it. The electricity in the building that night was incredible. I mean, that was a phenomenal one. So Amanda Nunes, the GOAT, again, I'm surprised and I'm not surprised that the line is as high as it is. It just goes to show the respect. But I will say, again, it's an uphill battle for Irene Aldana, but it's a battle that she's been wanting. It's a battle that she, I think, is built for stylistically. Man, she's got great striking. Her boxing is as good as anybody in the UFC. So I'm excited to watch this thing play out.
The people's main event coming up next, the co-main. And I'm surprised they almost didn't, like, I don't know. I guess how you can't switch it to the Maine just because the title was on the line. I don't know, but I'd love to see this over 5 rounds. I think it's a shame it's only going to be 3. Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush, the most overlooked, other than maybe Belal Muhammad, the most overlooked fighter in the history of this game. Charles Oliveira, Dariush, obviously, I would say number 1 contender fight. It's obviously number 1 contender fight if Dariush wins.
Fights don't get any better than this. Yeah, I mean, listen, so the UFC is kind of hesitant sometimes to say number 1 contender just because, schedules. I know. And the only reason they don't is for business purposes, right? Because it's like, well, what place are we going to? Who do we have available? Do things change? Is somebody hurt? Well, we don't want to not have a title fight because we said that was the number 1 contender fight, but he can't compete. And that's the only reason they're hesitating to say it. It's just business purposes. But for you to say it is exactly right. I mean, Beneil Dariush, the run that he's on, man. I mean, you just look at the names and the win streak that he's on right now. It's pretty dang incredible. And he's one of the nicest dudes you'll ever meet. And so he hasn't been one to sit out there and demand and say, I must have this. You got to give me this next. It's just not in his nature to do that. But the win streak that is on and the position that he's gotten himself to is unbelievable. Meanwhile, of course, you have Charles Oliveira, who is exciting as they get, and what a beloved champion he is. I mean, another guy that kind of grew up in the organization and had some growing pains along the way, but then developed into this dominant fighter. I mean, one of the most dangerous jiu-jitsu artists in the history of the sport, adding some striking to that as well. He had some major wins. Of course, he lost his title to Islam Makhachev, who's unbelievable in his own right. I mean, this is it. I mean, this is a number 1 contender fight. It's an incredible fight. I'd be interested to hear the odds on this one because I got to think this is, I mean, to me, this is a pick'em type fight. So I don't know what
you say. Pick'em?
I say pick'em. Is it a pick'em or you know what? Hold on. I'll take that back. To me, this is a pick'em fight, but I will say Charles Oliveira, former champ, much beloved superstar. Maybe Beneil Dariush, quiet under the radar, doesn't get the love that he necessarily deserves. So maybe I'll throw Charles Oliveira at like a minus 130, 140, somewhere around there. But to me, this is pick 'em all day.
Flip it.
Dariush is the favorite?
Beneil Dariush minus 158.
Wow. I love it. I love it. That is the betting community, the odds makers, those that have laid it down, giving that man the respect that he deserves. I am happy to hear that.
Good.
So good.
And if you watch him fight, he's so smooth in every single thing he does. With the gray hair.
with the gray hair that makes it seem like he's way older than he actually is. It's so good. And again, I'm telling you, man, one of the nicest dudes you will ever meet, man. I mean, I really, but I have respect for both these guys. Charles Oliveira, again, a dude that came into the UFC as such a young fighter, man, and really grew up in front of our eyes as well and ascended to the heights that he is now. I love this fight. As you said, people's main event. I do think it's right. I mean, you leave the champions in the top spot. You do. I mean, the champions deserve that respect. They are champions for a reason. But Charles Oliveira, a former champ, Beneil Dariush, a guy that should have had a title shot, I think, probably a long time ago. Now he's in that position. This is the fight that I think most fight fans have circled on there. It's like, whew, this means something.
It absolutely does mean something. So that's kind of going to be our preview for pay-per-view this weekend. Now, before we go, we got to get into it's like, hey, you got to hit the daily Conor McGregor check mark for the show, okay? USADA said, okay, first off, is Conor and Chandler going to happen? Because USADA, they came out just the other day and said they anticipate McGregor's paperwork very shortly. But as of recording time, they have not gotten it. So, press conference this past week, you asked Dana White what's going on. Let's roll that footage.
I just want to ask one more. With the Ultimate Fighter debuting, can you give us an update on Conor and just what it's taken? Is there any concern that this fight doesn't happen or that it doesn't happen when you want it to? What's the progress with getting him and Chandler booked?
No, you can't think like that. I mean, listen, that's the business we're in. Anything is possible in this business. We were just talking about PFL and what happened to those guys. Anything is possible. You don't know. And you guys don't know fucking this much of what goes on behind the scenes and how hard it is to put all these fights together. I mean, when you look at what Sean and Mick have done this last week to keep some of these guys in the fight, like Jim Miller, and bring in savages from Tajikistan, you know what I mean, on short notice. you know, this is a rough business to keep your fight cards together and pull this stuff off. So, what the fuck was your question?
But just where Conor is. I mean, like, what?
Oh, Conor. Yeah.
You know, like we know they're supposed to fight. They were coaches, you know.
Right.
But we know he's got to get back in the pool. But
yeah, we've had. First of all, Conor called me a couple days ago, and loved the first episode of The Ultimate Fighter, and saying how happy he was that he was a part of it. And I think being here in the environment and everything else, he felt it again and felt like he wants to get back and fight. The one thing that you guys have to understand is this kid has so much money. It's like Habib now. It's like these guys got shitloads of money, and it's hard to, it's hard to reel these guys back in and get them fired up to get in and fight.
Are you concerned that maybe he doesn't fight again?
I never get concerned. You know what I mean? Listen, when guys show, we have a massive roster of people that want to come in and people that are ready to fight and people that want to be Conor McGregor, and be at that level. It's like for the last 20 years, everybody said, oh my God, what are you guys going to do when Chuck Liddell retires? You guys are fucked. Oh my God, GSP, Anderson Silva, this and that. This is a professional sport. People come in here, they achieve great things, and they retire. You know what I mean? You can never worry about that type of stuff. It is what it is. It's part of the game. It's my job and my team's job to find new talent and build them and take them to that level.
And what the hell does that mean? Okay, so I am now more questions than I have answered. He says he's not concerning himself with that, and then he rattles off a bunch of former fighters who have then since retired. First of all, you didn't ask if he was going to retire, right? So, but I think it boils down to, like, he's really saying, like, I can't get myself into the weeds. Everybody's going to be replenished, and no matter what, we're going to make a great end-of-the-year card. But I'm going to put you on the spot right now, John Morgan. Does this fight happen this year?
All right. It's funny. Since that press conference, I've kind of had a little bit of regret in that I wish I would have followed up or asked the question in a little bit different manner and said how, and basically kind of framed it the way you just did, is to ask him, how confident are you? Because what I asked was, are you concerned this doesn't happen? And he kind of laid out there, no, I'm not concerned. We just go about our job. We do our business. Whatever happens, happens.
Anderson Silva retired. GSP retired. What?
I kind of wish I would have framed it as, how confident are you that this fight happens? And maybe he would have given the same answer in a different way, but at least maybe try to get an evaluation, because I'm still right now, me personally, as I sit here right now, I'm still hopeful this happens. Now, we're nearing that 6-month mark, right? I mean, there's a proposed event in Las Vegas. I mean, they do an end-of-year event every year in December in Las Vegas since the beginning of time, right? And so it's, there's still December 17th, I believe is the date, 16th, 17th. I'm not sure what the Saturday is, but basically we're coming up on that 6-month mark. And USADA has made it clear that Conor McGregor left the testing pool. He's going to come back into the testing pool. He initially teased maybe they'll give me that exemption where I'll get the 2 tests and I'll be good to go. And USADA said, I don't think you really qualify for the exemption. As you and I discussed, we thought that wasn't going to be likely. 6 months is what it's going to take. Well, guess what? We're right up on that 6-month mark. So I think the UFC, now again, this paperwork that needs to be filled out, it's not like it's some, it takes weeks to prepare this paperwork and you have to go get it notarized and then it has to be reviewed. And then it doesn't take long. So, I mean, Conor McGregor being the flair for the dramatic that he has. I mean, I think back to when he fought in Fight Island, right? And he was in the boat, in the marina, in the yacht, and they were like, bro, you got to come inside the bubble. We got to have you here for 48 hours because you got to have these 2 negative COVID tests, and then and that's how it works. And he's like, yeah, but I kind of got my own bubble out here in the boat. And they were like, no, that's not going to work. So literally at the last possible minute, like 48 hours out, he comes trotting in with his crew, and he obliged by the rules, but he did it at the last possible minute. And so I'm holding out hope that at the last possible minute, he's going to file this paperwork. But I will tell you, as I left the UFC Apex that night after that conversation with Dana White, I mean, even before I left, I started looking around to the media that was around me, and I'm like, that didn't sound real confident that this fight is going to happen, right? I mean, I'm not the only one that picked up on that, and everybody just said, yeah, no, that didn't sound real confident at all. So I'm worried. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. And I will point out that there is still time. But
Hey, Mr. No Answer John Morgan. Let me dial this question.
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Right here and now. This fight happens this year. You're saying it.
I'm saying we got a little less than 2 weeks to get this paperwork filed, and I believe in Conor McGregor, and I believe that this is gonna happen. I'm saying it now. It's gonna happen. We still got 2 weeks.
Hey, listen, Nostradamus Morgan over here. Whenever he says something, it happens. So. I mean, if you don't believe me, go read his stories on the underground. Go look at his Twitter, man. God, you are Nostradamus with a lot.
I'm dialed in. I believe it. I understand why everybody's concerned. I'm concerned. That conversation concerned me, but I will point out there's still about 2 weeks to get this paperwork filed, and I say the paperwork gets filed.
All right. Well, good stuff there. I do like the back and forth with Volkanovski, though. Like, I would love to see that at 55. Woo!
Oh my goodness, it's wild, man. I mean, listen, I don't know how much more Conor McGregor will fight. I don't know how many more times he'll compete. You know, this may be it. Maybe this is it. But you know, and I said it recently. I was talking to our friends at Submission Radio, and I was like, look, you know, if this fight does happen as scheduled, as we hope, I think I'd probably lean towards Michael Chandler, to be honest with you, just based on the activity level, based on where they stand. But styles make fights. Chandler gets hit early. You know, he's been in some wars. That's why we like him. Conor McGregor, when he hits people, they stay down. You know what I mean? They don't necessarily come back. So, and nobody in the history of the sport has ever performed better under the spotlight in those situations than Conor McGregor. I do not count Conor McGregor out. You know, I probably lean Chandler, but I do not say it's you know, a given. Conor McGregor performs better in the spotlight than maybe anybody in the history of the sport. So I'm hoping it comes together. Listen, I found, you know, the first episode of The Ultimate Fighter to be entertaining. I mean, the back and forth between those two, I'm like, you can just tell they're going to annoy the heck out of each other as the filming continues. So I'm anxious to watch how that series continues to unfold. And I hope the fight does happen. I am hopeful. And yeah, I'm still saying it's gonna I mean, I'm not. Don't ask me to like bet my mortgage payment on it or anything like that. But I'm hoping it happens.
Hey, we all, as fight fans, we all wish it happens. It was a fun episode today. Again, you can follow anything John Morgan says and done at the undergroundmixedmartialarts.com. Follow him on Twitter, John Morgan _MMA. I'm Eric McMahon. I don't write any good columns. I'm a horrible writer, but every now and again I do tweet _Mac Life. So going into this weekend, you're not going to Vancouver. Anything else going on?
No, I'll just be watching. Like I said, not making the trip to Vancouver. I got some trips coming up. Got some commentary duties over the next couple of weeks, but this one I'll be watching from home. As you said, the title fight. You got, you know, the people's main event, the co-main event. Hey, pay attention to Dan Ige and Nate Landwehr on the main card. I think that could be an absolute banger. You know, it's the return of the UFC to Canada. I know it's long awaited for those guys, so a big moment for the fans up there. But I'll just be enjoying Las Vegas this week. Spend a little time with the fam.
Sounds good. Nothing but family time for me as well. So UFC pay-per-view this Saturday night. Is the Lioness going to continue her dominance over the division? Wait and see. Who gets the #1 contender? Wait and see. But for John Morgan, I'm Eric McMahon. Enjoy the fights.